Welcome to That Handicapping Show. I'm Claire Novak, sitting in for Tom Amara, here with Pete Denk, and a special preview of the preview type of Breeders' Cup edition. We're going to talk about the Friday races, and of course we have to kick off with the Ladies Classic, one of the best races of the Breeders' Cup this year. Just a race that is stacked with talent. Pete, who do you like?
Well, I've been a big fan of Royal Delta all year, and I was kind of hoping we'd get a surprise and she'd be pre-entered in the Classic, and I guess that could still happen, but it sounds like it's not going to happen.
Yeah, pretty much Benjamin Leon saying, he wants to run her in the Ladies Classic. He wants to point her to the World Cup next year. And I think from what we got after she won the Beldame, unlikely to go in the Classic.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this Lady Classic could be the race of the weekend. I mean, one of the things we always like in the Breeders' Cup is you get this clash of champions from different generations. You get the regional clash of, the top horses from all around the country and the world that have never faced each other before. This Ladies' Classic has a lot of that. We've got, undefeated champions here. We've got a nice class of 3-year-old fillies that, unlike our male 3-year-olds, has not been completely ravaged by injury.
Exactly.
So I think it's going to be a great race, and I haven't been a huge fan of the 2-day format. This is going to be a great centerpiece for Friday. I almost wish it was on Saturday this year.
Well, and we've got this Saturday, we have Via Villaggio, who's one of the horses likely to go there. She's going to run in the Lexus Raven Run, and she's the horse that is shipped to the East Coast to compete against Royal Delta and those types of quality horses questing. So she should be interesting to watch this weekend at Keeneland to see if she continues on. And then, of course, undefeated champion, you mentioned Awesome Feather, who, just so impressive the last time she ran. So very interesting to see her in there with just a bunch of other great fillies and mares.
Yeah, questing, Mimas Aurelia. It's going to be a really good race.
Moving on to the filly and mare turf, we have an interesting potential contender there with In Lingerie, who won the Spinster at Keeneland, and then Eclipse Thoroughbred Partners saying she could potentially run there because of her affinity for Polytrack instead of running in the Ladies Classic. So that's one to keep an eye on. No definite there, but potentially in the filly and mare turf.
Yeah.
That would be your first start on the turf.
Yeah, and this is going to be a deep field. This will be probably one of the most wide open races of this Breeders' Cup. And in terms of depth, there's going to be a lot of strong contenders near the top. We'll have at least the top 3 from the Flower Bowl in all likelihood, and some really good European shippers. In addition to a couple 3-year-olds that might try older, Stephanie's Kitten. And then out on the West Coast, we have Lady of Shamrock, who's been a really good 3-year-old filly. But this is always the ultimate test when 3-year-olds are stepping out of their ranks and trying older here. It's not an easy task. But I think we're going to see a really good field in this filly and mare turf.
Moving on to the juvenile fillies, and we talked about Lasix, no Lasix for the 2-year-olds in all the races at the Breeders' Cup. An interesting fact that of the North American win-in-year-in juvenile races, all the winners of those races have raced on Lasix last time out, and I think there's only one. I think the Chad Brown filly that raced in England initially, and so she didn't have Lasix for a couple starts, but has run on it both times she's run here. So how do you know that going into this race, and do you just have to say, well, look at how they ran last time and who seems to be the best, and oh well, they don't get any Lasix, basically?
I'm not sure. We're going into new territory here. The juvenile fillies has always been a race that the Americans have won, so you're probably not going to see a really good European even try this race this year, I don't think, on the dirt. And like you said, all these fillies have raced on Lasix. This is going to have one of the more prohibitive favorites of the 2-day card, I think, in Executive Privilege. I'm a huge fan of Executive Privilege. There is one very interesting filly in here by the name of Kawhi Katie, who's probably going to be cross-entered in the juvenile fillies and the juvenile sprint.
Right.
So she might take on boys. She has a stablemate, Dreaming of Julia, that's expected in here. That'll be one of the decisions that the connections we make that could change the complexion of one race or the other. I'm a huge Kawhi Katie fan.
And Dreaming of Julia won the Frazette by a head over My Happy Face. That was one of the more exciting, I think, races of this year. And owner Michael Dubbs saying My Happy Face will stay in New York. He's not going to send her to the Breeders' Cup. So you've got Dreaming of Julia coming off the head win there. But obviously some of these other horses like Kawhi Katie, Executive Privilege, have just won for fun last time out. So
yeah, you can look at Dreaming of Julia's last race two different ways. I haven't been a huge fan of hers. I've actually thought Kauai Katie was the better of the two stablemates. I don't think the connections share that opinion, but you know, her last race was her first race where she really had to work to win, and for someone like me who kind of thought she wasn't as good as everyone thought, she was exposed there. But for her fans, they're going to say, well, she had to fight. She got that, you know, off
Belly
race
down.
out of the way,
Yeah.
and she probably is going to move forward off it. So.
And that's the race that the filly flipped in the gate. They had to take a bunch of horses out of the gate, etc. She didn't have to wait in the gate from what I remember. She hadn't loaded yet when that happened. So
Yeah.
that wasn't a situation that really affected her that way. But still, that kind of delay there, and, you know, interesting. I think like 3 horses scratched out of that race then. So
Yeah, another filly that could pop up here but may instead go for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Sprint also is Beholder, who lost a nose decision to Executive Privilege at Del Mar, and then when she got to the dirt at Santa Anita, they put her in an allowance non-winners of 1, and she ran, you know, one of the fastest races any 2-year-olds has run this year. Probably the fastest race on just about any figure.
interesting. Juvenile fillies turf. Mark Cassidy has a couple of really nice fillies right now. He's compared them to Sealy Hill, who was the 2007 Canadian Horse of the Year, ran second in the filly and mare turf in 2008 at 48-1. And he has Spring Venture, who is going to go in the juvenile fillies turf. This is a win and you're in winner of the Natalma. She won last time out at Woodbine. So she's going in the turf. And then his other win and you're in winner, Spring at Last, is going to go in the juvenile fillies. So she won the Alcibiades. She'll go in there, but Spring Venture undefeated and looks pretty good in this race.
Yeah, I couldn't be any more impressed with Spring Venture. I look at the Natalma as probably the key race, but there's also a couple good New York fillies in here. Spring Venture, definitely the one to beat. She's going to be coming off a polytrack race where her speed figure is going to be a little bit down, so it'll be interesting to see if the bettors zero in on her as the clear choice. I think she is the clear choice going in, but there's some quality in this field. You talked about that Frizette where there was an incident before the race, and
Right.
I think they wound it up with just a 4-horse field by the
Yeah.
time they ran it. Filly that was in there, Nancy O, who is coming out of the Natalma, she is bipivotal and was trying dirt the first time. It was an absolute disaster. I really like her getting back on turf. I don't think she's as good as Spring Venture. She was third to her in the Natalma, but I think she's the kind of horse that if Spring Venture stubbed her toe, Nancy O could keep her honest. I think she's a turf miler, and you know, she's getting back to that scenario, and she could be an interesting long shot perhaps.
All right, powering on, you have some thoughts on a couple of races that I don't have any thoughts on. So tell us what you think about the marathon and the juvenile sprint.
I've never been a huge marathon fan. I think it's a pretty good race if it's on turf, which I don't think it's ever been, but when it's on synthetic, it was a decent race. I don't like it at 1 3/4 on the dirt. America is really the only country in the world that produces great dirt horses and tests them on dirt, so we know who we have, but we don't produce 1 3/4 horses.
Right.
The Europeans are going to ship in. They've got plenty of great 1 3/4 horses, as do several other countries around the world, but they won't be proven on dirt. Remains to be seen if anybody top class is coming for the race. I'm not a big fan of it, though. And the very first day on Breeders' Cup Friday is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Sprint.
First race, yeah.
And this is going to be an interesting race in that we're probably going to see a fast filly or two take on the boys. And we also have a little bit of a class dropper, such as a Burn Identity, who was running against the top colts on the East Coast. I think more so than saying he's a sprinter, they might be just saying, I'd rather not run against Shanghai Bobby and maybe the top West Coast colts, or they're going to try the sprint. I think that's a good move. And as we talked about early, Kauai Katie could pop up in here. Beholder could pop up in here. So it should be a contentious race, the juvenile version of the sprint. One of those races where you have so much speed, it just looks like a closer has to win, but we'll see.
Interesting rundown of the Friday races, and keep in mind these are of course pre-entries, so not sure every single horse is going to show up, but you know, pretty confident on the top contenders that we mentioned. Thanks so much to Briss for the PPs, and we will see you next time.